Okay.
Okay, Kat. I'm going to let you join me on my lap to record the podcast. But do not do your thing of trying to bat my mic.
Don't do that, Hector.
Don't do it, Hector. I
Hector?
can see you looking at it. See you looking at it like you want to bat it.
Put the headphones on the cat. Hector?
Wait a minute.
It's really good. Hector, I need you to listen to me very carefully. If you bat the microphone.
He's recoiling.
If you bat that, well, he knows he's in trouble.
He wants to be on air.
He knows the disciplinarian is here. All right, listen to it.
I'm trying to eat the microphone. No, don't eat the microphone.
Hector! This is specifically what we talked about.
Yeah. See, he can't be trusted. Feral cats.
Is he sulking?
No.
Ugh, no shame, even.
He's just staring at the microphone again. Still on my lap. I could kick him off, obviously. And
you could.
All of this is redundant, but
but you won't. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, as always, Connor Rebush, and with me, as always, is Phil McKenzie and Hector. Phil, do you expect your new cat to have any sort of, illuminating insights into the wonderful fights that we're going to be talking about today? Or is she just gonna be
as he is basically adopted. From the streets. He is a fighter at heart and will contribute in his own way. Mm-hmm. So if anyone hears a sort of loud thudding impact coming from my mic, that is because Hector has woken up from my lap and decided to attack my headset.
He's really the Ian Heinisch of the cat world.
Yep.
That rough and tumble upbringing.
Yep. Grew up hard. Up mean, but has a heart of gold underneath it all.
Wow. Truly the mascot that we deserve. Just like a sort of a little shit-eating monster. Well, welcome everyone to this week's edition of Heavy Hands. Hopefully we, I guess I should lay out what we're talking about. It's Usman Burns. We got some good fights this week. Pay-per-view, as has been the case for the last little while. Despite whatever, COVID mishaps and everything, the pay-per-view cards have still managed to be pretty stacked. And this one is really no exception. I mean, we've unfortunately, I literally just found out as we were starting, we've lost one of the fights I was looking forward to the most, the rematch between Pedro Munoz and Jimmy Rivera. Their first fight several years ago now, something like 5 or 6 years ago. Was a certified banger, and the rematch could not help but be the same kind of thing. Hopefully that'll happen in a couple weeks, and hopefully whoever got that positive test in one of their camps is already on the road to recovery. But we still have Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns, which is also, and I think we will be dipping into this angle heavily, Phil, Henry Hooft versus Henry Hooft. That's kind of interesting.
Yep.
In the co-main event, Macy Barber taking on Alexa Grasso in Grasso's now second consecutive women's flyweight bout. That one should be interesting. It makes me think sort of a, a rehash in a lot of ways of Barber's close scrape with J.J. Aldrich. So we may see some similar dynamics playing out there. Then we have Kelvin Gastelum versus Ian Heinisch, which are two dudes who are very similar in a lot of ways. Two guys who their wins both feel like they're very dependent on who they're fighting. So I think if there's a sticky one we have trouble wrapping our heads around, that'll be the one for this week. Bobby Green versus Jim Miller, Bilal Muhammad, remember the name, versus Diego Lima, and some other stuff besides. We're going to try and get to as much of it as we can. And I guess I should just say now, if you want to hear us talking about Volkov versus Overeem in recap, then you should check out the Patreon. We actually had a bit of extra chat about the undercard fights there last week, Phil, that I may have forgot to post on Patreon. So I think just for novelty's sake, if you guys want to hear the ways in which we were right or wrong, more likely, I might tack that on to the end of this week's bonus episode where we recap Alexander Volkov and Corey Sandhagen both just brutally murdering two old men and getting away with it. You know, tons of witnesses. No one's going to stop them. But let nothing stop us, Phil. Usman versus Burns. It's our main event.
I was just going to say.
Oh, yes.
You know, we can edit this out of the show later, but
I will.
If we want to re-release that kind of stuff, I think it would be fitting if we re-recorded just like little segments for ones that we were wrong on.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually.
Yeah,
that's a really good idea.
It can just be I'm picking which were the ones that we actually broke down for that one. But whenever we're wrong, just I'll say, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to confidently pick, let's say, Frankie Edgar to win this fight, and then just edit in. Actually, no, I have changed my mind. I will be picking Corey Sandhagen.
You know what, Phil? It might add a little bit to our schedules, a little bit of extra time, but I think we could do that for every single episode. No one will ever be able to prove that we've ever gotten a fic wrong. We will just sort of sneakily, you can do that, the Libsyn lets you just sort of sneak in a new file without having to take the old episode down or anything. So as of now, we're going to be like the Stalins of MMA podcasts. Painting out our own mistakes.
The only problem is people downloading the podcast and then having copies of our lives beforehand.
Okay. Well, we'll have to talk about hunting these people down. How possible that is or may not be. But Usman versus Burns. That's our main event, Phil. And as I said, it is, it's not only, these two fighters against each other. It is also sort of Henry Hooft against himself. Both of these guys, in fact, have transformed radically under Henry Hooft. Like, both are really, really big benefactors of his coaching in some really obvious ways. And can you think of another time when we've had something like this?
I mean, sort of Rashad Jones.
Okay.
I mean,
now don't take this the wrong way, Phil. I'm actually a little more interested to see what two Henry Hooft technicians can do against each other than I am to see what two Mike Winkeljohn technicians can do against each other. It's just me.
But I mean, ironically, that was also the fight that sort of led to the founding of,
the Black
Zillions, Imperial Athletics, whatever you want to call them.
Team Evil.
Which is now just Team Evil.
Mm-hmm. And weirdly, these are also probably two of the nicest, most respectful and members of Team Evil with the cleanest criminal records, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's nice too. Both of the good boys are getting the shine in this one. Well, that's very interesting.
And I think Vicente Luque, who is possibly the last remaining Black Zillion Team Evil good boy, is going to be cornering Burns. So going to get all of their good people around the cage at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's interesting. And Henry Hooft himself is, of course, I think he's already said he's not going to be there for either guy. So it really is a test.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. It really is a test of, what these two guys have learned already. It's not going to be, cause I think both of these guys are notable in how well they respond to corner instruction. And so it's not going to be a chance for Hooft to pilot either of them. It's going to be just relying on what he has managed to ingrain in them by this point. So I'm very interested in that angle. Can you think of any major contrast between these guys? One did sort of start to jump out to me the more I watched, but I'm curious to hear what you've seen between the two of them.
Contrast in terms of how they approach the fight. I mean, they both
or as Hooft strikers is what I was thinking. But yeah, let's just lay out how they're going to approach the fight as well.
I mean, they've both developed into pretty solid, aggressive pressure fighters.
Mm-hmm.
Usman is probably the more effective wrestler of the two, unsurprisingly.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, I think he's also more of just like a boxer.
Yes.
He doesn't like to kick quite as much as Burns does.
Yep.
Burns definitely has more of like the Brazilian feel to his style, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Not even necessarily a Dutch style. Like there's a bit of Hooft's Dutch kickboxing in there, but I don't know. It's kind of difficult for me to distinguish. It's kind of like it's like pornography, Phil. I know it when I see it. I'm not sure I could define for you the Brazilian style of kickboxing, though I think there is an old episode of this show where Pat Wyman and I tried to do that. But yeah, there is something about Gilbert Burns that's just very Brazilian. Is it the sort of like reckless madness with which he leaps in with single, fully committed techniques? Maybe.
I do think that he's also... I think the thing is, with him being more of a kicker, I think it's basically because kicks are his range weapons.
Yes, I totally agree.
And Usman is... I think this is probably going to be quite significant. Not only the bigger man, but the much straighter puncher.
He's the jabber. He does the jab, which you and I are famous by now for just creaming our jeans over. We love a guy who does a jab. Yeah. Well, here's the thing that sort of occurred to me as I was watching these two guys and watching, what I found to be like sort of pivotal moments on both of their tracks of progression. I thought it was interesting that we had at one point pegged both of these guys as overthinkers. People that were, you could clearly see them like thinking through their moves, trying to sort of look ahead at what the exchange was going to be like, doing a lot of like gearing themselves up for the exchange they knew was coming and then launching themselves into it. And likewise, you could see both of them sometimes getting overwhelmed when the opponent just didn't give them predictable responses or ate a shot and fired back. You could see both of them sort of suffer from that tendency to overthink. And I think I can say now that both of them have developed, obviously technically, but people know me. I'm always interested in the mental progression. And I think Gilbert Burns I think they've sort of diverged since then. Gilbert Burns, I think, has developed into a guy who now refuses to think too much. I think he has solved his overthinking problem by just getting like braver and more aggressive. He throws hard. He commits to his shots. Like his fight with Rashid Magomedov, Gilbert Burns's, might be relevant to this, thinking about those straight punches and counters and everything. And in that fight, Hooft's advice to him was no half measures, don't pull back on your shots because he's definitely going to counter you then. Just follow through and commit, which is, one way of dealing with somebody who is countering you and making you hesitant. That was the real hurdle for Burns there. And I think he solved that, like I said, by just like getting meaner and committing to his shots harder. On the other hand, I think Kamaru Usman has learned to become a better thinker. I don't think he has shut that instinct off. I think he has bolted on at this point enough stable fundamental technique that he allows himself to make more detailed decisions. And I think you can see this in the way that they sort of think, the way they sort of layer their attacks. I've been impressed ever since I first saw it with Kamaru Usman's finishing sequence. The final 2 minutes of his fight with Colby Covington, there's some really good boxing in there. The way that he throws away the hook, for example, in order to close distance, feet perfectly under him, and then uncorks the right hand. Then when Covington is hurt by that, the way he reverses that threat, he reverses that switch up. He shows the right hand and then cracks Covington with the left hook. There was a lot of thinking further into the exchange, of throwing combinations, but like knowing what the reaction to the first strike would be and using that to make the second shot effective. Gilbert Burns is much more, if he's throwing a combination, it's like jaw clenched, full power. He throws like a maniac sometimes, even now. He throws really, really hard. And he does not have that like sort of layered thinking, but that could be a problem for a guy like Kamaru Usman. One thing I've really noticed about Usman is that I think he so relies on having like this stable platform of his technique, really keeping his stance solid under him, keeping a nice guard, not putting too much weight on one foot or the other. He's just a very balanced, well-schooled striker at this point, a good boxer, as you said. I think you can see in a lot of exchanges, like in that Covington fight, he would rather like eat the shots in a good position to receive them than give ground and throw himself out of position in an attempt to get away. And that could obviously be a problem for Burns if he's coming in just hell-bent for leather, swinging, taking advantage of the fact that Usman is just like sort of a stable, stationary target sometimes, at least until he starts to get his defensive reads. But in a way, I think that I've been really impressed with that in Usman. Like, he's got a great chin. I think he knows his technique is there for him, so he doesn't get shaken even when that does happen. He is ready with responses. But Burns is still way more likely to fling himself out of position either while attacking or while defending, to address the immediate need. And for Usman, it's like, I can afford to miss a few shots. I can afford to, like, I can still do something with that. I can build off of a miss, turn it into an offensive success, or I can afford to eat a few as long as I'm in the right position that allows me to eat those punches without getting hurt. If my balance is there, I have my shocks in place. So that's one major difference that jumped out at me watching their recent footage. Usman, I think, putting himself in position to think and adjust over the course of a fight on a tactical level. Burns, I think, pulling away from that and becoming much more just strategically, hewed to the idea of what kind of fight he's supposed to be fighting and sticking to it. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Burns has become someone who has, I think, made himself enjoy the fight. You know, one of the things we know about Team Evil is that it's a big, hard sparring gym.
Yeah.
And that's what Burns looks like the product of.
Yes. He looks like a Cordero fighter in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's all like bravado, you know, machismo fighting.
Meanwhile, Usman is someone who I think is fairly insulated by being giant and insanely powerful, and thus can spend a lot of mental energy on making himself into a coherent offensive kickboxer. It's one of the reasons why the Covington fight was, as I think, as competitive as it was, is that Covington is also, in his own way, someone who heavily emphasizes offense over defense, upright stance, volume striking, and not all that much in the way of defense. So it ended up being this real banger of a fight where, again, the fact that Usman was able to bank on his own chin, his own durability, and his own power were like big difference makers for him.
Yep.
So yeah, Burns is not the hitter. I mean, Burns is much more of a hitter than Covington is.
Yes, I think
Covington
so. I
did
think
not dead Damian Maia with one punch when he fought him.
Right, exactly. And I think even without that single point comparison, I just eyeball test. I think Burns is a significant puncher in a way that Covington never has been.
So yeah, that's a big question mark for Usman. But beyond that point, I think it gets hard to imagine past a victory for Gilbert Burns, to be honest.
To imagine what, past a single shot knockout type of victory? Yeah,
past hurting Usman.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's the fact that he might be the kicker in the matchup. If Usman is concedes the kicking game to Burns and doesn't want to take him down because he's worried about the takedowns.
Right.
You could conceivably see Burns chewing up his lead leg. Other than that, I think the main issues, the issues are in, wrestling game. I mean, we've seen this recently. We saw it in Dariush Ferreira. That, maybe Carlos Diego Ferreira is a better grappler than Beneil Dariush. Dariush was initiating the wrestling exchanges and was, a step ahead in the wrestling exchanges for that reason throughout their fight.
Wrestling is still the
Burns.
thing, man. It's still the base for MMA, and I don't think that'll ever change. It allows you to control position, and we all know position before submission, position before any kind of attack. Position is king. So yeah, the wrestling advantage, I can't see it not being like whether or not Usman wants to take Burns down, it's Usman who has the option of deciding where the fight takes place.
Doing that against Burns it has not been a death sentence historically. He is more of a Jacare Souza where his game is predicated on top control than it is on being, a wizard from his back.
Right.
And, we've seen him get into pretty bad trouble against, even going all the way back to, was that his debut when he fought Alex Oliveira?
I think it was not quite his UFC debut. It was early. And that was also speaking of, I think, is that the only time he's gotten a guard submission? He had a submission of Łukasz Sajewski, but I don't recall if that was from his back or not.
Also, it was just a really weird scramble.
Yeah.
Rather than any kind of, I think it was, he got the armbar from Mount, actually.
Yeah, I didn't think it was from his back. I think the Cowboy Oliveira one is the only one. Triangle armbar or something from his back. But after getting
I think Cowboy Oliveira was from Mount.
Oh, was it? Oh, my memory is mistaken. Either way, it was at the tail end of 3 rounds of getting brutalized by Cowboy Oliveira, mostly.
Mm-hmm. And that's, so that's partially where the problems start to rise up. There's also the Michel Prazeres fight. As we've mentioned before, a big concern. Something we thought might come into play against Tyron Woodley, but Tyron Woodley is not really there for this kind of thing anymore.
No, he's not. Well, he lost
his... like a consistent, dogged wrestling threat.
The man lost his penis, Phil. Have some sympathy. Your fighting style might also degrade somewhat after a trauma like that.
Very fair. But yeah, Prazeres able to kind of just grind Burns out. Again, an old fight, but probably not unrelevant.
No. Although,
even going more recently as to the Damian Maia fight. How did Burns approach that? An outfighting performance. He tried to outfight he tried to have an outfighting performance against Damian Maia. He circled the cage and he got taken down pretty easily and early in the fight. He was just able to scramble back out of it. So, I think basically 3 things. He's not a bulletproof defensive wrestler, although he's a very good one. He can and has been outground, or ground out even, in long fights like that. And whilst he's much more aggressive than he used to be, he's still prone to long periods of putting his back up against the cage.
Yes.
Which I think was another one of the reasons why Colby Covington fight with Usman was so competitive. Because as we've mentioned many times, many parts of Usman's game start to look worlds better when the opponent has their back to the cage, whether it's his striking or his wrestling. Right.
Yeah. And Covington's game as well. Right. And Usman just didn't give ground. That was one of the most notable things about the performance. He just didn't let Covington pressure him. I think that was part of it too. Like, I'm in a good stand.
It was that both of them are pathologically come forward fighters.
Yeah. Yeah. But
thus they just spent a lot of time in the center of the cage with neither one of them backing up much.
Right.
But Burns really isn't like that.
No.
He does give ground a lot.
Yeah. Even to Rashid Magomedov, who comically, I heard on the commentary in that fight, I've remembered this quote ever since I heard it, but it takes a reminder to bring it to mind, was the time that Rashid Magomedov apparently told John Anik he thinks of himself as a pressure fighter. Like, buddy. You're not a pressure fighter, buddy. You're a counterpuncher. But even the counterpuncher, the pressure fighter who isn't, did manage to push Burns back for significant portions of that fight. Yeah, I think that is a major difference here. As I said, Usman, like, relying on, I love Usman's stance. I think it's really good. I just like the way he carries himself. Right hand is always by the chin. Left hand is up, but it's extended so he can keep that jab. He can measure distance. He can paw. And his weight is a little more pulled back than Gilbert Burns is very front foot heavy. Which, makes him much more of a target when he isn't allowed to come forward, especially. He's retreating, but his head is still there to be touched. I think that'll be a problem with Usman's jab. Usman, on the other hand, I just really like how he holds himself. He's always ready. His head's a little back. It's not an easy target, but he's still got plenty of give in his stance to create more space for his head. I think as we start to see Usman develop his head movement, he's going to start to look like a really good boxer. If that part of his game does come along, which I suspect it will. Because there were periods like later on into that Covington fight where we saw more of that as well. So yeah, I think the pressure thing, Usman just, when he knows, I don't know if it was the Covington thing, if it's, as you said, a pathological, aspect of his personality, but he just doesn't give ground. No matter how much both these guys are pressure fighters or want to pressure, Burns is willing to give ground. He's not comfortable in the pocket, not nearly in the way that Usman is. Even if Usman's getting hit, he'll maintain his position and not back up. I think that's big. The other thing you mentioned that I was going to bring up, you stole all my good points about Gilbert Burns. The kicking from range, I fully agree. He tends to lead with kicks. He treats his kicks the way Usman treats his jab. They are, as you said, his range weapon. They're frequently his, the weapon he uses to initiate exchanges. And that could be a problem for Usman. I mean, he could get his leg chewed up, although he was really good at getting away from the low kicks of Colby Covington. Again, that was a southpaw orthodox matchup, so a little different. But he did a really good job of taking small angles, creating space, again, always keeping that stance intact, and just not checking, but just removing the target from range. But the high kicks of Covington were kind of a problem, actually, at several points in that fight. And Gilbert Burns will fire those, just no load up or anything, just no setup even, can sometimes be an advantage with a head kick. Because it's much harder to block and or catch and counter a high kick than it is pretty much any other kind. So little tactical things, but I think the big strategic picture here is that Gilbert Burns' weapon from long range is susceptible to Kamaru Usman's. I think we saw that back in his fight with Rashid Magomedov. All the moments that he got hurt in that fight was when Rashid just threw a straight shot down the pike when he was kicking.
Yep.
And Gilbert doesn't really set them up. Like I said, they are the initiating strike. He feels safe from that range. And Usman has deceptively long arms. And very quick straight punches, really snappy, like piston-like straight punches. So I think he's going to have a big advantage. He's going to have the range weapon advantage. He's going to be able to answer Burns' kicks specifically with that range advantage. And that's going to give him the pressure advantage, which I think he already kind of just nascently has over Burns. So, and honestly, I don't see this one going to the ground. I feel like Usman is, by and large, a cautious fighter. Like not in a way that, I mean, obviously he's perfectly comfortable pushing someone back and staying in their face and trading blows with them. But he doesn't, he doesn't take chances, on things that are not going to, that don't fit into his picture of how he's going to win this fight. Jorge Masvidal backed into the fence. It could have been a death sentence, but instead it was life imprisonment, right? Usman just kept him there, chipped away. I think the same thing applies to Gilbert Burns. I think we'll probably see some clinches against the fence, but I don't think there's any reason for Usman to take Burns down, and I suspect he knows that. So, kickboxing match, Usman better pressure. That's my pick.
So yeah, just a couple of things to add. I think Burns' defense is actually one of the things which has improved the most over his time.
True.
In the UFC. Like really used to be a defaulting to the double forearms kind of guy.
And flinching while he did it.
Yeah, like Vicente Luque. But this is something which he's much better at. I mean, he's still pretty vulnerable to counters due to the aforementioned, throwing himself through space.
Mm-hmm.
But his defense in the sort of the neutral exchanges is much, much better than it was. I still do worry about him putting up the double forearm guards by the cage, particularly, especially because Usman, as we've seen recently, has started to really love body shots.
He loves the body shots, and I love him for it.
Yep. And what was the last thing I was going to say? Cormier, I think, said something about this. When there's two guys in the same gym and they're both, at approximately the same level, generally people in the gym and the people there know who is better.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys have probably fought a lot. And, if Usman does have a significant edge over Burns, he's the thinking fighter that we know he is.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be able to leverage that into a more consistent way, to a more consistent win. He's not necessarily going to be surprised by what Burns does. There have been fights where this dynamic can be flipped on its head. I think the classic one is, Paula Woodley for the ATT gym war. The word on the ground in that one was that, unsurprisingly, Bobby Lawler completely tuned Tyron Woodley up in sparring whenever they fought.
Yep.
But I think Woodley is a smart competitor and probably sandbagged slightly.
Or he just made a good tactical decision, right?
Yeah.
Almost certainly, most of their sparring was like most of Tyron Woodley's fights, with Woodley backing up and not doing much. And that might be a very compelling reason to lunge forward crazily in the first minute of the fight.
But I think, the reads in this fight will necessarily be a bit more developed than we would expect from two strangers fighting each other.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see.
Also going to pick Usman and probably by some kind of finish. I think the range disparity is too much. Burns has filled into his frame at welterweight, but he still is a stocky dude. There is no way on earth Kamaru Usman could ever make lightweight.
Yeah, Usman is a guy who looks stocky until you see him next to another person. He's big and thickly built. He has
bearing in mind, 10 years from now, when weight cutting has continued somehow to evolve and lightweights the size of Kamaru Usman are in fact the norm. I'll have to eat my words, but bigger, more sustained range weapons, more consistent pressure offense. Burns has struggled with wrestling. Mm-hmm. Don't think Usman needs to use it, but he might just to wear Burns out.
And it is just a passive advantage. It keeps Gilbert from getting to an area of the fight where he might have an actual significant advantage of some kind.
Usman probably by second or third round finish, I think.
Yeah, you think he's basically going to break Gilbert Burns down, attrition, that kind of thing.
Body shots, jabs, clinching. Maybe the clinching will extend the fight. I hope not.
I can see that. I don't know. I'm kind of expecting it to drag out a bit. I would not be surprised at that exact kind of finish. I think it will be that kind of fight. But like we saw in Usman versus Masvidal, he's not above just sitting on his advantage and maintaining a lead. And so if the fight is shaped the way we expect it to be, I suspect he will be in just as comfortable a position here down the stretch as he was there. But I do want to say, just before we close out, there is that chance for Gilbert Burns. There is that Woodley Lawler kind of thing. And the fact that Usman is, consciously or not, willing to eat shots in order to maintain his fight, like we said, that could be a genuine problem here in a way that it never would have been against Colby Covington. And he ate a shitload of punches against Colby Covington. He really did. And even did get a little shaken up, I think, at a couple points. He kept it together super well, but he's
he was definitely hurt.
Mm-hmm. He got shaken up, I think, twice in that fight. So, yeah, it should be a good one. But Usman, it's just hard not to pick him. Too many advantages. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, the co-main event is between Macy the Future Barber and Alexa Grasso. That one should be interesting. Kelvin Gastelum versus Ian Heinisch after that. And then we'll see what else we end up getting to from this card and last week's as we continue. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on down the UFC 258 main card. I didn't just have to read that number. Of course, I can keep track of them effortlessly. Macy Barber versus Alexa Grasso. I already prefaced this at the top of the show, Phil, by saying I think this is Macy Barber's opportunity to revisit the fight she had with JJ Aldrich, which is just rewatching it. I thought of I started to think of her as Cejudo, Henry Cejudo, because it was a real girl Cejudo type of fight, if you know what I mean. It was very much like Cejudo's win over Marlon Moraes, where she just got her shit kicked in for like every portion of the fight until she made the decision to just brutishly exchange with JJ Aldrich. And you know, there were some actual little tactical adjustments. I think the shot she hit Aldrich with was actually like a lead right off of a feint, kind of tricky, you know. That's like boxing 101 level of trickiness, but it's more than just crude swinging. But mostly her answer to JJ Aldrich was physicality. And I think this fight is either an opportunity to show that, yes, she can still use that to bully better striking technicians, or a chance to show that she has improved technically. Gotta be honest, Phil, I'm leaning towards the former as a slightly more likely option. I'm not super confident in Macy Barber as a technician yet. I think that might be the kind of thing that requires a camp change or a new coaching staff. And it also must be said, this is her first fight back after that, I think it was a knee injury, right? Against Roxanne Modafferi. That was back in January of 2020. So it's now been over a year making her return. Has she gotten better, or will the same old still be good enough?
So, I mean, the Modafferi fight is pretty concerning, right? Because if you're someone whose basic MO has been getting into trouble in every fight you're in, and then just hulking the other person out of there.
Yeah.
Being unable to hulk Roxanne Modafferi is a bad sign.
Slightly concerning. I mean, all credit to Roxy. She's turned herself into such a focused, game plan driven fighter. She's become a real efficient pro at how she approaches her fights, but it's still like people who have a physical advantage just still beat her. All of them except for Macy Barber.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, it just shows that like Macy Barber's either Macy Barber's like technical flaws are still glaring enough that she can lose basically everywhere to Roxanne Modafferi.
Yeah.
Or it's that she's not that much of a physical force. And either one of these are both like pretty bad things. I think the general thing is that Barber looks like she is one of these people who is an MMA native in the good and the bad ways.
Mm-hmm.
She's pretty decent at most things for, how experienced she is. At least, that's what we've seen so far. But she doesn't really have a core skill set.
No. If she
Which
succeeds,
Macy Barber's particularly good at.
Being strong.
Yes.
That's about it. Yeah, the advice she got in that JJ Aldrich fight too really was like the advice you give to that kind of person too. Because they're like, oh, she's getting completely pieced up. It was good advice from her corner. They basically said like, it's the transition from your strikes to the clinch and to the wrestling, to the takedowns. That's where you're going to make the difference here. Didn't entirely play out that way, but I think it was part of her, slowing the tide a bit. Against Aldrich, is that she was getting to the clinch more often and holding on to it, using her strikes to cross that bridge. And yeah, if anything, that is her strength. It's not any one phase, it's the way that they fit together into a whole game. I do want to give you a small amount of pushback, Phil. I don't know if the Modafferi, I'm not yet confident that it's that definitive. Because I do think that injury plays a part. We didn't really get to see her have the same chance she had against Aldrich to turn things around with, like moronic violence, because she really was on one leg, after like the first round of that fight.
It was the first round where she got dominated. I mean,
yes.
When did she actually hurt her leg? Because I remember there being some debate on this, but I thought she'd been losing the fight soundly before she got her leg.
She was. Yeah, she was. But that was the case against Aldrich as well. Yeah. She was getting beaten up really by JJ Aldrich and then just found a way to brute her way back into it. I think it was beginning of round 2. I think she threw a kick or something and got hit mid kick and then like twisted an ankle or knee on the way down. I'm watching it now, so when it comes up, I'll correct that if that's not how it played out. But yeah, I do. But to me, there's
she still had significant top control against Roxy. Yes. Where you would have thought she would be able to pound Roxy into jam.
Yeah.
But instead she got swept into mount. Like,
not good.
There were many concerning problems.
Yes.
In that fight. And yeah, I think the JJ Aldrich comparison is a strong one. Obviously the problem being that, whilst, Alexa Grosso is not the world's greatest defensive wrestler, and neither is JJ Aldrich, Alexa Grosso is a much more violent and capable fighter in many other areas.
Yep.
She's a much better stand-up technician. She hits harder, and she's really mean in the clinch.
And recently, she's a way more willing combination puncher. That was also a big thing, is that Aldrich could never really string together more than 2 strikes at a time. That's just kind of in her nature. I think she's a little more cautious than Grosso, and Grosso does seem to have really gotten over her early career caution by this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think Barber will be bigger. She's not actually significantly taller. I think they're about the same height and have about the same reach. I think maybe Grosso might actually have an inch of reach over her.
Barber is, and not in a Mackenzie Dern way. She's thick. Like, she's a solidly built person, though. Like, she looks so much bigger than JJ Aldrich. And Aldrich, like you said, frame-wise is smaller than Grosso. But keep in mind, Grosso has been competing up until her last fight at strawweight, not flyweight. She seemed to pretty easily make 115. I don't recall any.
Oh, no, she had weight problems.
You're right.
Which is really weird. She didn't look too big for the class at all.
Yeah, you could hear me hesitating at the end of that sentence as my memory was like, whoa. So yeah, who knows? Yeah. What if Alexa Grosso comes in and bulks up into the division? That could happen too. But there did
seem... Matthews, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, she does, like I said, she never looked like someone who was big for 115. Mm-hmm. If you looked at her against like Tatiana Suarez and you're like, which one of these women has trouble making this weight?
Right.
Yeah, I think she's about the same height and reach. Probably, Barber's a lot bulkier, but, and this is one where I think, Barber is really going to have to show a coherent takedown game.
Yes.
She can outstrike, Alexa Grosso. I will be absolutely shocked.
Yeah, and the problem for her is that she hasn't really shown that yet. But what is Macy Barber's go-to takedown?
I'm really struggling to think of it,
Right. I think she's hit like a head and arm throw at some point. I think she's also just knocked people off balance and gotten on top of them.
I feel like if Getting head and arm throws as your only takedowns should give you a negative score.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think, like we said with Overeem, in last week's preview, like there's just too much of the incidental about Maycee Barber's success. There's not a coherent process there. And that doesn't mean she can't find moments. Like Alexa Grasso was, super nip tuck from first bell to last against Carla Esparza. And while Carla Esparza is a way more coherent, process-driven wrestle boxer than Maycee Barber ever has been, there is also the fact, as we always mention with Carla, that she's tiny. And Maycee Barber is not. And really, I think the issue in that fight for Grasso, like she has a really good, first layer takedown defense now. She's really bulked up that part of her game, but it was the layers. And maybe Barber doesn't have the layered skills of Carla Esparza, but can she make up for that with physicality, with drive, with, making the first connection and just bullying through? It's a path. I don't personally see it playing out that way, but it is the path for Barber, I think. One of the few paths, and they all rely on physicality. I'd love to see her show some more technical wrinkles. It happens sometimes.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, Barber is 22 years old.
Yeah.
He's been a pro for 3 years. She has basically been out since fighting Roxy.
Yep.
She's been a pro for 4 years, for like 3.5 years. She's been out since fighting Roxy for essentially almost a third of her career.
A third of her career. Yeah.
So we could genuinely see something very, very different from her.
Yeah.
Because there's one thing we've heard about her. She is she's also just like extremely naturally talented. She has a lot of the gifts that will make a good MMA fighter.
Yeah. Yeah. Cannot disagree. So I would love to see that. I'd love to see Maycee Barber come out and look like Brian Ortega did against Korean Zombie. But hey, that transformation, it still took a while to get there from where Brian Ortega was originally when he was a young prospect. And I haven't seen Maycee Barber take that first step really yet. Little twinkles of it. Like I said, against Aldrich, once she, I think, felt she was in the fight physically, then she was able to kind of play around and add some layers to her striking and a little deception in there. But it did still feel like she had to assert herself physically first before she even had the confidence to try. And, the barrier standing in the way of her asserting herself here, as against Aldrich, is, atrocious defense. Really, really bad defense. And against a better, more aggressive combination puncher with longer reach. So yeah, I'm taking Alexa Grasso, but I sure hope it's not I sure hope it's not an athleticism wins fight. And I do still think it really could be. Grasso is not bulletproof, even to bad takedowns.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take Grasso as well. I think Barber has to show a giant leap, to win this one.
Yep.
And, she can, as I said, but, have to see it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on then. Our next fight here on the card, Kelvin Gastelum versus Ian Heinisch. Last week, Phil, we couldn't stop saying, boy, these fights are perplexing. I just don't see a strong enough advantage. Two of the fights we mainly said that about ended up being phenomenally one-sided. Those being the main and co-main event in different ways, but both equally one-sided. This one, I think no one can tell me this isn't perplexing because Ian Heinisch, let me just lay out like the way you broke it down for me a little while ago. Ian Heinisch, the question was, has he ever beaten someone who isn't just a grappler? And that's an open question. I would go ahead and say no. Granted, middleweight, everyone's like a bit of a wrestler and a grappler, it seems. Certainly all the guys Heinisch has fought, and he hasn't beaten all of them. But the better strikers, or at least the more dangerous strikers, were the ones who beat him. Kelvin Gastelum, on the other hand, the question is, can he beat somebody who doesn't get the early bird special at Frisch's? You know what I mean? Can all of his most notable wins at middleweight are old men.
Yep.
There are a lot of questions here based on level of competition, and I think beyond that, both of these guys' styles are really sort of dependent on what the opponent gives them. Ian Heinisch really definitively is like, he's not a counter puncher. He's like his whole style is a counter to a whole other style. Aggressive grappling and wearing people out when they realize that he just will keep scrambles going, even if like he will turn grapplers' successes against them, make them think they can complete the shot, but it only leads them deeper into a hole that Heinisch is, perhaps due to his background, fighting for food scraps in a literal hole, more comfortable in. Kelvin Gastelum, on the other hand, a little more capable of like being assertive and just blitzing people. That's something Heinisch really struggles with. And yet, I kind of have questions about that in a way that I didn't before. You were telling me that Darren Till fight looks better in retrospect. I'm sympathetic to that argument, but not sold. Cause your point was Darren Till he gets bad fights at a lot of people. Slow, close, hair-splitting kind of fights. And you're right. But Kelvin Gastelum, shall we say, looked much worse than Robert Whittaker in that same sort of engagement. He didn't have any ideas.
Kelvin Gastelum is much worse than Robert Whittaker.
He is. He is much worse. And he didn't have any ideas how to get out of that boring, intractable fight. I don't think that will specifically be a problem. But I've just seen a little too much of Kelvin Gastelum, like, I don't know, waiting to see what his opponents want to do to him since that Adesanya fight. The last two. Granted, I don't know how much there is to draw from that Hermanson result. Quick finishes are always perplexing, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gastelum just doesn't like people who move a lot.
Yeah.
That seems very reductive. I mean, he is he is a middle guy. He's remarkably short for middleweight. Mm-hmm. And basically, all he wants to do is to have a straight line that he can spring down.
Yep.
And to then either land his left hand or to land a 1-2, which finishes with the left hand.
Yep. It's like
people who have denied him the left hand just by like circling or, setting up consistent range attacks so that he's not sure when it's time to come through. I mean, even, going all the way to Chris Weidman have been big struggles for him. Mm-hmm. And that does make the Heinisch fight interesting because there's one thing Heinisch does do. He moves a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Circles the cage a whole bunch. And you got to ask yourself, like, what are Kelvin Gastelum's range cutting tools? I mean, like range closing tools.
1-2. That's his tool for everything.
Yeah.
That's.
I mean, against Adesanya, he was able to slip and feint.
Mm-hmm.
But
in spots.
That
even then in spots, less of a
in spots.
Yeah, but better than ever before. But we also haven't seen it since.
And even then, like Adesanya, I think he is a more subtle fighter than your average mixed martial arts fighter, which I think actually works against him. Most MMA fighters, the fact that a lot of MMA fighters who are famous for footwork just move a ton,
mm-hmm.
I think is actually more troubling for someone like Kelvin Gastelum than a more subtle mover than like Israel Adesanya.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's just sitting there going like waiting for the target lock on his left hand so he can spring forward.
Right.
If it's just never there, he's just waiting the whole time. If Adesanya had just circled constantly rather than taking his opportunities to fight Kelvin Gastelum, probably could have drawn the same much easier but much more boring fight out of him than Till did.
Yeah, possibly. I'm not 100% convinced that Heinisch has that consistent a degree of mobility. If he goes that direction here, I agree that that'll be really effective. Kelvin Gastelum, I was going to say, he sort of fights like he was trained on like a crash test course. You know, like the rails just sort of slide him forward and he smashes into the brick wall, and then they just sort of slides right back along the same track. Very, very linear. I think that is a key thing. Is Heinisch that good of a lateral mover though?
He's a lot of a lateral mover.
Does he do it retreating, or does he just do it passively? Or does it matter? Does doing it passively mean that Gastelum doesn't get to set up, and that's your point?
Yeah, I think he can pull a pretty...
I can see that.
He can at least... I'm not saying he's going to win it, but I think he can pull a pretty dull fight out of Gastelum like that.
Sure. I mean, I still think when pressed...
Tireless, and he moves around a lot.
He does. I do still think when pressed, when threatened, he does just sort of scuttle straight backwards. Like, Gastelum still knows how to deal with that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I've always sort of compared him to Alexander Hernandez. And
who's that?
Alexander Hernandez, like, just running around in a circle and periodically, like, leaping forward, has flummoxed some actually pretty cunning MMA strikers. Mm-hmm. Ones who are much better than Kelvin Gastelum.
Mm-hmm.
Beneil Dariush and Francisco Trinaldo amongst them.
Hey,
sorry for those who Trinaldo beat Hernandez.
He did. Damn it. He did, and there's a very definitive result.
Scoring no one on it.
There's a lot to separate them. You know, one of me and Dr. Wyman's most famous arguments was about actually a man whose footage I'm watching right now, a Cesar Ferreira fight. Which one was it? It was that kind of fight, too. I don't know. It was one of the stupidest arguments I've ever had. We were getting heated arguing over whether there was any definitive result between, like, Cesar Ferreira and Derek Brunson, someone?
Oh, it was Elias Theodorou.
Oh, God. I don't want you to remind me, Phil. I didn't want to find out. Oh, yeah.
Well, now you know.
Yeah, that was the same kind of fight, I guess. Fair enough. Here's the thing. Kelvin Gastelum does throw real quick 1-2s.
He does do that.
And they're combinations. It's only one combination. It doesn't tend to go very far beyond that. But in this matchup, he's the combo guy. And he doesn't have to take Heinisch down, which immediately takes away Heinisch's A game.
Being taken down.
Being taken down. Doesn't have to do that at all. And otherwise, I think the question for me is kind of like, is Kelvin Gastelum still fearless? And that was the concern I had after the Adesanya fight, because that was a life-changing beating. I wouldn't be surprised if he started to actually, like come face to face with his own mortality after that kind of fight, where any other fighter other than Kelvin Gastelum, or maybe Carlos Condit, would have been, knocked out a dozen times. And then the Till fight, didn't help that impression. It did look like an way overly cautious. I'm sympathetic to the notion that there wasn't like an easy way in to that matchup for Gastelum with Till's reach advantage. We've seen Gastelum really hesitate against reach advantages before. Most notably, I think we spoke at the time about his fight with Neil Magny. He had to convince himself to close that gap. And certainly the Hermansson fight, while I don't know how predictive it is of anything, it didn't give me the idea that Gastelum is confident. So that's a question for me. If he does still have that confidence, I think he can just exchange with Heinisch and win. He's faster. He's always been insanely durable. And he throws 1-2s. It's not just one punch. And Heinisch is really just kind of one punch most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm taking Gastelum. But
yeah, no, I agree with pretty much all of that.
Really depends how he looks.
I'm gonna take Heinisch because I think it'll be funny if he wins.
Complete meme pick, Phil.
I don't know. It's not just that Gastelum has made all his like made a career out of just sitting outside the bingo hall, shaking down all the old men who are coming out. It's that before we started recording the show, like we were saying that, you know, these guys are two sort of pretty perplexing dudes, where their main approach has been to sort of hope the other guy bounces off their physical attributes.
Yeah.
But I feel like Heinisch is an overachiever and Gastelum is an underachiever.
Yeah.
Because Gastelum is good at so many things.
Yeah.
Is good at, as you said, he can do the 1-2. He's a fantastic, like, rear naked choke.
He scrambles as well as Heinisch. You know, he's an amazing scrambler.
Despite, you know, apparently not being not watching his diet or anything, Gastelum has incredible cardio.
Mm-hmm. The chin. My God, the chin.
Yeah. And Heinisch is not really particularly good at, like, anything.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that's why I'm going to pick him to win.
All right. I like it.
Because he really tries to win fights.
He really does.
Really tries. Doing, mostly not doing all that much. He will win fights by making them frustrating. He will win fights from his back. Despite having no discernible, skills, is never out. He's just incredibly mentally tough.
I think you're going too far deliberately for effect. I just want to let the listeners know Ian Heinisch does have some skills. You got a couple.
Also I trust Ian Heinisch to develop skills more.
Sure.
Because
maybe.
And we've seen better striking out of him in the incredibly brief Meerschaert fight and even the Brunson fight. And I just don't trust Gastelum to chase people down. I think the fact that Heinisch is orthodox is a big concerning factor. If Heinisch was southpaw, I would pick him confidently.
Yeah.
It'd just be like he's a southpaw who runs away.
Yeah.
What's Gastelum going to do to him?
Yeah.
The lane for the left hand's still there.
And that is one of the things that makes Gastelum's one combination so enduringly effective too, is a lot of people, already orthodox fighters, are, by simple statistics, unused to fighting southpaws. And they're especially not used to fighting southpaws who consistently jab. And that is Gastelum's way in. The southpaw jab can be a very tricky thing if you don't know how to deal with it. And something tells me Ian Heinisch has not had many opportunities to deal with a good southpaw jab. And Los Angeles Fajeda snapped his head back with a good one in their fight. But, yeah. Gastelum's just got an experience edge there. And,
It's that I don't trust Gastelum to,
mm-hmm.
If Heinisch is tireless and moves a lot. I just don't trust Gastelum to outpace him in any meaningful way. Gastelum just accepts whatever pace the fight's at. A Tyron Woodley pace with Tyron Woodley, at a much higher pace with Israel Adesanya, but he doesn't leverage his cardio for anything.
So does Ian Heinisch, though.
But that's because Ian Heinisch can't. What's he going to do?
Well, then how does that mean? I think the most compelling reason to actually pick Heinisch you've given so far is the broadest, most reductive one, the overachiever versus underachiever. I think there is something to that. Both of these guys are fighters who only have one idea of how to fight.
Yeah.
And, Ian Heinisch doesn't get bored of his one idea or discouraged, and Kelvin Gastelum can. So that is something. But I still think Ian Heinisch is also, people break themselves on Ian Heinisch. Ian Heinisch doesn't go out there and break people.
Mm-hmm. That's why I'm expecting this fight to kind of suck.
Yeah, me too. I'm hoping for better. But yeah, I think these are two guys whose styles are, it's weird because they're negative in a way that kind of hides itself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do kind of think we might be in for a slow-paced, split decision-y kind of fight here. But yeah, Gastelum's hand speed, basically. Hand speed, combinations. That's enough for me to pick.
I can't front on your pick at all. He is good at things.
He's good at things. Officially, at least two. You gotta give me that.
Yep.
All right, let's take one more break. When we come back, we've got Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. We've got Bilal Muhammad, and don't you forget the name, versus Diego Lima. Ricky Simone versus Brian Kelleher. We may not get to all of them, but we're going to get to as much as we can after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, we may just want to pick one or maybe two of those, Phil, because we're already at...
I think we can run through them because they're all really straightforward.
Okay.
Well, they seem pretty straightforward.
Okay. Then we can have a very short third segment because we're basically at an hour already. All right. You want to get started then?
Let's do it.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands, segment number 3. And you know what that means. The chaff. It's time for the delicious chaff, the part of the wheat we all enjoy. Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Actually, I shouldn't call this chaff. I love both of these men. Jim Miller refuses to go away. Bobby Green refuses to even seem like he might be ready to go away. Somehow he's gotten better at this late stage of his career. He's found a second or third wind. And what has already been, I mean, how long has Bobby Green been fighting? Both of these guys.
January 19th, 2008 is his first.
And Miller's like 06 or something, right? 05.
Yep.
Lordy. 2 long careers. I do have the feeling that Miller is closer to the end of his than Green is the other way around. And I suspect, Phil, you gave me a hint that you feel all 3 of these matchups we're going to discuss are pretty straightforward. So I think we might be in agreement on this one. What do you think?
Pretty rough matchup for Jim Miller, even in his prime.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about his inability to close into the pocket against rangy fighters. That's Bobby Green's whole game.
Yeah.
Jim Miller can make up for it by being able to wrestle or just, out hustle people on the ground. When he can't, he'll create some kind of ground situation and be able to capitalize on it when he can't have a kickboxing match with them in the pocket. But that doesn't really work on Bobby Green either.
Yeah.
Bobby Green is less physically degraded.
Defense, folks. It's work on your defense. I think it's because he's got great defense. Just doesn't get hit clean that often, so he looks perfectly sharp and yeah.
So, I think it's one of those fights where I think Bobby Green probably respects him too much to finish him, so we'll get a pretty comprehensive 3 rounds.
Do you think that's it? I've always had the feeling with Bobby Green that it's not respect, it's like boredom. And that when people sometimes make the mistake of trying to beat him up too hard and then he wakes up and destroys them. Or at least it becomes an incredibly competitive, exchange-filled kind of fight. Either way, I don't see Jim Miller unleashing the beast in that way. As you noted, he has long had an issue with pressuring, even in matchups where it's so clear that that lane is open for him and it is the way to win. Most notably in recent memory, the one with Anthony Pettis, but there's been many where Jim Miller's just not a pressure fighter. It's not in his nature. So yeah, staying at the end of Bobby Green's reach seems bad. How do you feel about Jim Miller's chances at making low kicks a thing?
Yeah, I was thinking that's the only thing I can really, it's the only thing I can really, think of that he could use to change the fight around a la Dustin Poirier. But nah, I don't think so. Bobby Green isn't that easy to low kick just because he's so long. He fights so long and he just punches people off there. Like Edson Barbosa beat him up, but that was mostly, he did a lot of outboxing Bobby Green.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing too is that, He's like deceptively hard to kick because the opening seems obvious because Bobby Green is one of the few MMA fighters who really does rely on a shoulder roll, and blading his stance, making a small target for boxing weapons. But we all know you turn side on, someone's going to kick the shit out of your hamstring, or, sciatic nerve at the back of your calf or whatever it is. The thing with Bobby Green though is that like I think you would have to throw punches and follow with kicks. I think that's the only reliable way to get to that leg. You have to throw like Dutch combinations. Miller can do that. The question is still, will he do it consistently enough? Will he press forward? Because that's what you need to make those kicks effective. You have to be able to be willing to follow your punches in. And once Bobby Green starts countering you, that becomes a slightly chancy proposition. But the other thing is that the reason why I think you have to lead with the punches is that Bobby Green is not tied to that stance. He's actually really flexible. But
I was going to say, but he's also generally, he's generally orthodox, right? Which means it's open stance, unlike like Poirier Miller was.
Oh, true. Yes. Yeah. Very good point.
So yeah, even then, the low kicks are not necessarily open in the same way.
Yeah, high kicks become a real problem there if you're dipping and moving your head a lot over that back hip in an orthodox stance. And Bobby does switch stance a lot. That's the thing is his stance is very situational. At kicking range, he's not in a shell or a crab sort of guard. He's square. He's in like a square Muay Thai stance at long range, because that's the best way to deal with kicks and to fire them off yourself. And then it's in boxing range when he sort of shifts and slides into that side-on position. So it's situational. And I think all of that basically says that Miller really has to press forward to make the kicks a factor. And those are the only thing that really seem like a real opening in this matchup, because otherwise his chances at consistent success would rely on taking Bobby Green down and keeping him there. And can you think of a single person who's ever done that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like one of the best analogs in Jim Miller's fight career to Bobby Green is Nate Diaz, who absolutely torched him.
Yeah, he did.
And Nate Diaz is nothing like the defensive wrestler that Bobby Green is. Again, he's a more effective offensive boxer, but at this stage in their careers, probably doesn't really matter all that much.
Yeah,
I think again, this would be a rough matchup for Miller at any stage in their careers.
Yeah,
just much more so now that Bobby Green still has his physical gifts and Jim Miller just doesn't.
Yeah, Bobby Green looks like he's in his prime. In a weird way, he looks like he's still in his prime right now, or for the first time, perhaps. Like maybe he's one of those fighters where, like Anderson Silva, that you can allow the physicality to potentially dwindle a little more and rely more and more on the accrued experience and knowledge and technique. And that if Bobby Green has physically degraded, you can't tell because his game is still as functional as ever, if not significantly more so. So good shit. Not for Jim Miller. Bobby Green, too good defensive wrestling, too good at fighting at range. Yep. I don't like Jim's chances. Okay. How about our boy, Belal Muhammad, whose name I have not forgotten. He's fighting Diego Lima. This seems like a goddamn layup. Frankly, like way more than the Green Miller one, because that one at least has a chance to be boring enough that Miller will keep getting opportunities. This one, it's like Diego Lima puts his back against the fence. What does Belal Muhammad do to people who do that? Whatever he wants, usually.
Yep. I mean, I think this fight makes sense. Lima is surprisingly enough on a 3-fight win streak.
Yeah.
Doing a split decision over Luke Jumeau.
Jumeau's not too bad. He's a guy who he seems more underwhelming than he is. He's like Thibaut Guti. Remember him?
Seems more underwhelming than he is.
Yeah. Like he's like you look at him and you're immediately like, oh, this guy's not an athlete. But then he's crafty.
Later on, you are slightly more whelmed.
Yes. He will whelm you at some point in the matchup. I don't know. I just think he's a better technician, a craftier fighter, a tougher guy, than I think sort of like in the first round, he just always looks kind of like shit, but he's not that bad. He's pretty good.
This really feels like exact same style matchup that Bilal Muhammad just had, but easier. Just Lyman Good, but way worse. I mean, not way worse, but like Lyman Good without Lyman Good's chin or power.
And we should mention that was a very impressive. That was a very impressive win for Bilal Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
We sat in his head just real hard, but I don't even think it was that. I think we looked at it and we're like, the physicality. And Bilal Muhammad just once again proved he can just fight exactly the right kind of fight. And this time, like, the right fight is just going to be dropped into his lap. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. All the weaknesses of Lyman Good and not really many of the strengths.
Right.
Lima's, he's still a hitter.
Mm-hmm.
Still hits hard. He deaded poor Chad Laprise, but.
And he's become.
Bilal Muhammad he's been hurt before and even put away, but
takes a lot.
Takes a lot.
Yeah. And he also doesn't have to hang out in the range where Chad Laprise, like if there's one area in which Lima has improved, it is, in actually doing something when his back hits the fence, not just collapsing, but remaining a viable threat. And, that's when you're on the end of his reach. And Bilal Muhammad is more durable and I think, more, just better schooled, more well-rounded striker at that range, but also he doesn't have to be there at all. He can just crash into the clinch and chip away, which he also likes to do. So easy pick. Sorry, Diego. Would love to be proven wrong. I'm so confident about that one. I can't help but be pleasantly surprised.
I would not love to be proven wrong. I want Bilal to remember the name Muhammad to keep winning.
You're right. I take it back. Last fight. Ricky Simón, Brian Kelleher. This one you also lumped into easy picks, Phil, and I feel like I need your assistance. Why do you think that?
Kelleher is a decent defensive wrestler. Is he a good enough one to beat Ricky Simón? I feel like this pretty much comes down to, is Kelleher going to guillotine Ricky Simón, and if not, I feel like he's just going to get out wrestled.
Probably. I mean, that will happen in spots. The thing about Ricky Simón is, he doesn't tend to keep people down. I think there are a lot of chances, and, Kelleher has proven, like, he is an opportunist. He's sort of, kind of just occurred to me, but he's kind of like, he's here to fill in Ricardo Lamas's shoes. Doesn't have the same exact background, but he does have a knack for just sort of, staying calm and making adjustments even in very tough fights. He's had a couple of things like that throughout his career. He had, that spinning back fist against Josh Robinson, back before his UFC career. That was like an out of nowhere move that, was a really smart adjustment to the kind of pressure was being put on him. He found that knockout punch against Hunter Azure, after a pretty tough back and forth fight, stayed calm, made the adjustment, saw how Azure was defending his jab and set him up for the hook off of that. The thing with Kelleher is that he's like Lamas, he's a finisher. He does not have to win rounds in the same way someone like Ricky Simón does. He just needs moments, and he might capitalize. Now, Ricky Simón has been, like, ungodly tough, and he hasn't gotten submitted. Has he ever been submitted? He got rear naked choked by Anderson Dos Santos. It's not a great look, but it was a while ago. Oh, and Uriah Faber knocked him out, too. Forgot about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a chance. Kelleher has some power. He's an accurate, sharp puncher, and he's not just going to keep throwing the same things over and over. And even with the speed of, like, Ray Borg, Ricky Simón, I think, was able to manage the sort of predictable rote pattern punching that Borg fell into. And even despite that, he still got hit to the body a shitload. There were still certain openings he just couldn't adjust to. He is sort of like Colby Covington. He's a pace or nothing fighter. He's going to break you with attrition and pace, or it's going to be a tough dog and fight. And I think Kelleher's capable of hanging in there, possibly hurting him. I still think that leaves me the boring conservative fight picker to go with Simone, who seems like he has the big strategic advantages. It just doesn't seem like enough to pick on, but I don't know. Kelleher's a dangerous guy.
Yeah. I mean, Kelleher's he's a difficult guy to pick because he fought many good wrestlers in MMA and in the UFC, and those who have, I mean, the one who did fight him, just beat him fairly cleanly in a kickboxing match.
Cody Stamann. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very...
that comes down to like the ghost of Renan Barão.
You are correct. Or I think when he fought Jimmy Rivera, it was during the boring wrestler phase of Jimmy Rivera's career. I think there was a bit of that in that fight as well. But yeah, that is a point worth bringing up. I have seen him...
But yeah, I mean...
Go on.
You have a point on the opportunism thing, because Kelleher is a very, as you mentioned, he's a very focused finisher.
Yes.
And Simon is someone who's incredibly confident that he's going to overwhelm his opponent.
Yes. And that's the kind of guy, maybe not the wrestling, but that kind of attitude and pace is what tends to like wake Kelleher up into the fight. Hunter Azure brought the same fucking energy, and Kelleher is just one of those guys who has to get busted up a little bit, and he zeroes in. So I don't know. I think he'll find chances down the stretch. I don't know that I can pick him to win any of them. I can't even say confidently what any of them will look like, because it is always kind of novel. He finds it as he goes. But it'll be there. So I'm looking forward to that. I like Kelleher as like a perpetual live dog kind of fighter, you know? And he's
always a ton of fun.
And he's funny on Twitter.
He's one of these guys who's managed to like leverage a decent career during the pandemic, I think.
Yeah, and he's also one of the few MMA fighters that is like actually good on social media. He's like worth following. Him and Bilal, they're both funny on social media.
Excellent.
All right, well that's UFC 258. Pretty solid card, top to bottom. There's a couple of little weird spots. A couple of these are maybe feel a little too predictable, but I think there are enough like little sneaky chances. And otherwise, like Gastelum Heinisch, just perplexingly well-matched fights that we get enough of everything on this card. It's a full meal, and I'm looking forward to it. And at this point, I really like watching Kamaru Usman perform. I just enjoy the progression he's made. I know all his fights aren't barn burners, but I love a good, just reliably technical, thoughtful, ice in his veins kind of fighter, and I love watching Usman turn into that more and more over time. So,
watching someone maximize their physical gifts.
Yes, yeah, that's it. That really is it. Because he could cheat, he could just rely on the cheating, but he's headed in the GSP Jose Aldo direction. He's like, what happens if I do all the stuff these other losers have to do, and bolt that onto my incredible physical gifts? And it is a treat to watch. Next week, hopefully this still plays out. I see no reason why it shouldn't, but I may as well mention that I think we're going to have Dan Tom on to break these fights down after the fact. He mentioned he basically only ever gets to do previews, and he envies us that as I envy myself, Phil, when I'm having to do a preview. I'm like, boy, I wish I was talking about something that already happened. So we're going to have Dan Tom from the Protect Your Neck podcast on next week to talk about that. And if you haven't heard it, I was on his show not too long ago. We talked about top 5 athletic cheaters. And so we got to talk, each of us had our top 5. Surprisingly, only one crossover. And I swapped out for another one. I tried to go kind of interesting with my choices. A lot of them were that kind of, this guy's a great athlete, but he's also technical. And that's why people don't think of him as a raw athlete. So it was a lot of fun. We had a good time, shared some laughs, talked about some historical fights. Check that out. The Protect Your Neck podcast. And we look forward to having Dan on next week. Before we wrap up, Phil, anything to plug?
Not at the moment, although I would recommend that people go and look at the incredible video breakdown on the fight site of the Corey Sandhagen versus Frankie Edgar Flying Knee.
Yep, it is titled.
I think simply... it goes to show you what a lot of people can see. Just a lot of people, think a short fight is just that, but I think that breakdown really shows what a wealth of technical exchanges are happening between the fighters.
Yeah, I mean, people will critique
just that tiny amount.
People critique technical analysis. They say it renders fights kind of bloodless. You know, it takes some of the fun out of it. But I think this really sort of peels back the layers, this breakdown. And it should help. It gives you a fuller appreciation, you know, for the complexities of even such a short fight as that. So it's called simply How Corey Sandhagen KO'd Frankie Edgar. You'll find it on the Fight Site YouTube. Highly recommend watching it. And it's like the fight, surprisingly brief. Won't take up much of your time. As for me, I'm going to be putting out an Usman versus Burns piece on Bloody Elbow this week. Hoping to get that out Thursday, but it'll be out by Friday at the latest. Usman versus Burns, hoofed versus hoofed. That's kind of the angle I'm taking, tracking these two progressions, the kinds of fighters these two men have become under the tutelage of the boss of Team Evil, Mr. Evil himself, Henry Hooft. So look forward to that. You'll find that on bloodyelbow.com. As I mentioned at the top of the show, you can also find some bonus material this week. Volkov versus Overeem, Sandhagen versus Edgar, the aforementioned, and other stuff from that card as well. You'll find that on our Patreon. It's $3 a month. And, that's not much, folks, is it really? Even if we haven't always put out the requisite number of episodes, we also then try to, guiltily throw gluts of bonus episodes out there too. So in the balance, you mostly get 2 episodes a month, and it's only $3. You know, give me a goddamn break. Help me out. Anyway, find us on social media at Evil Greg Jackson, at Boxing Bush. First one's Phil, second one's me. This has been Heavy Hands. Hope you all enjoyed the show. We're looking forward to having Dan Tom on next week, and looking forward to talking to all of you then. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you goddamn came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.